thanking Paul for the excellent contribution he's made tonight. Can I now take questions? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll take the first 5, okay? Number 1.
Well, it's
stand up, please.
It's in 2 parts, really. My name's Zahid Ali. I had the pleasure and privilege last week at Labour Party conference of seconding a motion on an arms embargo on Israel at the conference, which was passed, and it was resoundingly passed. And I think that provides a rebuke to anyone within the Israel lobby who thought that the IHRA issue would clamp down on any criticism of Israel. It's quite a historic and significant event, I think, because not only did we manage to pass that motion which said there should be an arms freeze on Israel, but also as part of that motion we actually mentioned the Nakba, which is the 1948 catastrophe whereby Palestinians were displaced. And this isn't public knowledge, but in the private meeting that we had with Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, as part of the compositing process, she was very aggressive in trying to get us to take out the word Nakba from our motion. She was also very aggressive in trying to water down our attempts to call for an arms freeze on Israel. So we stood up to that pressure from her, and I think what was important about getting the motion passed and the atmosphere in the hall when it was passed, because I don't know whether you've seen the pictures and images, but there were flags being waved across the hall. But it gave Jeremy Corbyn the power and strength to argue within his shadow cabinet, who are still predominantly pro-imperialist and pro-Zionist, that the grassroots membership have spoken now, and they want to roll back a lot of that. As you described it, the history of the Labour Party has been completely anti-Palestinian, and now we can hopefully put a full stop and reverse that. So I think there was some quite important issues there, but just to wrap up, I don't know whether you saw this week as well, a British Board of Deputies council member has had a no confidence motion passed or called for in her because she criticised the nation state law. So even people on the British Board of Deputies are now being victims of this IHRA.
Second one.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions for you to the members here. One is about what you say about some people say the research that has been done that says the Balfour Declaration was in fact one side of an agreement which was made between the then British government and Rothschild, or to give their original name, Rothschild, their German name, red flag was signed. That for them to switch their financial support from Germany to Britain, that was the Balfour Declaration was the payment for that, basically. That's my first question. The second question is that what do you say to the statement that says conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism is in fact the biggest anti-Semitic act that you can commit? Because now it is in everybody's, well, practically most people in the world know the atrocities that the Israeli government has been committing. And therefore, associate that to Jews is in fact committing a grave act of anti-Semitism.
Yes. Thank you. Number 3.
Can you comment on the Andy Thompson, United Union. Can you comment on the role played by the rump of the Zionist left, which is overrepresented, I think, on the NEC, particularly from what has been up until the change of the composition of the NEC, and the lack of lack of any left analysis on the matter from John Landsman, who has been particularly has played a major role in the presence of so-called left-wing members on the NEC who have failed to speak out on this issue.
Thank you. Number 4.
Oliver Colonet, I'm from Birmingham Stop the War Coalition. In terms of, just very briefly, in terms of my own sort of personal journey, let's say, in terms of my understanding of Israel, when I was in school in the 1960s, some of my friends went to kibbutzes, and I thought it was absolutely fantastic, you know, this idea of communal living and back to the land. This one must sound very familiar. And so gradually over the years, the information starts affecting the consciousness of myself. I suppose the question is that for people to change their decision with regards to Israel, how important is the social media and the independent news channels in terms of enabling people to make a fresh new decision, you know, from what is being fed to them and has been fed by the BBC, which is monitored by Ofcom, a very strong pro-human rights organisation. Okay.
Thank you. Number 5.
Yeah, Stuart Richardson, Birmingham NEU. Paul's been too modest. He's written a very important book, actually, which I recommend to people, very cheap price of £6, on the whole history of the Labour Party, going back to the 20s. And the notion that people think, oh, well, the Labour Party's always got better positions than the Tories. I mean, I'll give you 2 examples. In 1944, the Labour Party conference called the removal of all the Palestinians from Palestine to the land given to the Jewish colonial settlers. Now that is actually much worse than what the UN actually agreed to, which was divide the country. Give you one more example. In the 1930s, as a result of a very dramatic and armed action by the Palestinians revolting against British colonial rule, the Tories, in a classic sort of neo-colonial, said, well, let's give the natives a few rights. And so they proposed setting up a native assembly, and this was being promoted by Tory ministers. This was opposed by the Zionists and the Labour Party, but because of course you would have an Arab majority in that institution. You couldn't have an Arab majority in a state that you wanted to create a Jewish state. The other thing I've circulated around a statement, and I'll pass it around again, produced by UCU and a number of international trade unions, which is a very good trade union statement critical of the IHRA, which I intend to propose that the Birmingham Trades Council executive agree, and then it will be brought back to the meeting next month for us to put our name to it. And if I can just pass that around again. Just lastly, I think the real debate is Israel a racist state? And I've got an article from the Jewish...
Chair, with respect, point of order here, I think the Speaker makes good points, but this is now a statement and not a question.
I said it was a comment, you know. But which
question.
I'll just finish this comment. If you look at the funding of Arab education in Israel, they get about a quarter of the funding of the Jewish children. Now, how can that not be an apartheid state? And this is from the Jewish Chronicle, from a pro-Israeli speaker. That is clearly the facts of that as a racist state. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Paul, would you like to answer those 5 questions, please?
On the Balfour Rothschild link, there was certainly a link, but I'm not sure whether Rothschild by that time was such a big capitalist financier as he had been, as the Rothschild family had been in the 19th century. So I'm not sure whether that would have been a really decisive consideration. I think the idea of it being a base for British imperialism was a more important concern. Although it's true that certainly Churchill believed, and he wrote an article to that effect, that if looking at the Russian Revolution and the prominence of Jews played in that he thought in this kind of anti-Semitic way that Jews didn't fit into society, and therefore if you didn't give them communism, if you wanted to avoid them going towards communism, you better give them Zionism. It would concentrate their mind. So I think that was more of a factor perhaps then. But of course you can't exclude what you said, which is that there might have been some financial consideration as well, but I've not come across that, to be honest. On the question of Zionism being anti-Semitism, I think you're quite right. I think they actually, philosophically, they share the same grounds as well. I mean, why is Netanyahu can be so friendly with Viktor Orban or with the other ethnic nationalists in Eastern Europe is because they have fundamentally the same conception that national belonging is determined by blood relations, by kinship. So the only people, Palestinians do not belong to the Jewish nation. They can be citizens, but they can't be part of the Israeli nationality, Jewish nationality. So that's one of the ways in which they discriminate against it. They're not part of the nation. They can be citizens, but not part of the nation. But the other form of nationality, which, and this came from Eastern Europe, actually, Zionism came out of Eastern Europe, where this kind of kinship relationship was really an extension of peasant relationships, where inheritance is very important. Nationalism was grafted from that. The other nationalism, which is a civic nationalism, is that everybody within a territory, irrespective of their ethnicity, belongs to part of everybody who lives in a particular territory and work there and contribute are part of the nation. And I think those two models of nationalism, those two ideologies of nationalism, are in combat throughout the world. I mean, we know perfectly well that a person like Enoch Powell or Tebbit, he doesn't believe that people of a different ethnicity can ever be British, because they believe in this idea that ultimately it's blood that determines your belonging. And Trump is another one. I mean, obviously, he doesn't believe that that people are part of America. So ethnic nationalism throughout the world is what fuels the right. And Zionism is a part of that, and I think you're quite right. I think it is also anti-Semitic. It conceives of a Jewish essence. So yeah, it's a flip side of I mean, I think Blair was another example. He was a philo-Semite. I remember he was talking to the Jewish community in this patronising way, saying that, I really admire the Jewish community, and what he was admiring in them is conservatism, petty bourgeois values. He said, you love the family, you work hard, you're enterprising. Well, these are not Jewish values. These are class values of a community that had become predominantly middle class. Nonsense, to attribute these social qualities to some essence of a particular ethnic group. So that philo-Semitism, that's philo-Semitism, love of Jews is a flip side of anti-Semitism, isn't it? So I think, yeah, as you said. On the issue of the Jewish, on the NEC, the and the Jewish labour movement, I think this is really harks back to what Stuart has also mentioned, the fact that the extent to which the Labour Party has really been wedded to this kind of idea that European settlement can bring development to the backward East. It's part of that same ideology that there is some kind of superiority among Europeans. And the Jewish labour movement is, it was originally formed as Pola Zion, workers' Zion, and it did have a working class base. But today, it doesn't have any presence in the working class. Its whole function is to lobby for Israel. I've never heard from them any statement that is remotely progressive in terms of its social content. I mean, they defend everything that Israel does, including the bombing of Gaza. I've not heard them condemn the Great March. In fact, I think they put out a statement initially saying that Hamas was responsible for the Great March of Return. So, you know, this is a propaganda outfit now for Israel. I don't think it's any kind of social base. And Landsman's role really has been to try and keep the right wing sweet, which is, I think, what his primary motivation is. He doesn't want to bring this issue up because he fears that the split might occur with the right for Labour Party. On the issue of social media, I think you're right. I think it's quite a significant development in some ways because, we ourselves on the left can now be informed about what is happening in Palestine in a way that we weren't in the past. Electronic Intifada and all kinds of other outlets present the Palestinian viewpoint, which I don't think was available. The sad thing is, of course, there is a certain sense in which we are in a bubble, you know, that the people who are in the know about where to look can find the information, and those people who don't know where to look are locked out of it. But nonetheless, I think there is a potential there. Of course, you know, also get the Zionists using it as well. But nonetheless, I think it's an important. I would just mention one thing which I came across in relation to this anti-Semitism allegations, that the idea of virtue signalling. You know, that I think the liberal media has got a cheap way of demonstrating their anti-racism by going on about this anti-Semitism. It seems to be a way of telling the world we are so enlightened, we are so opposed, and so that they can act as the prosecutors against the Labour Party, allegedly the bastion of anti-Semitism, without ever trying to really probe what is behind this. You know, whether there's any kind of empirical fact. So if you say there isn't anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, or the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party is insignificant, they say you're in denial. So, I mean, you know, there's no reference to any kind of empirical study to it or evidence to it. Never mind about evidence. If you deny it, you're in denial.
Thanking Paul for his reply to the questions.